I'm going to go ahead, and I noticed it's 11. I know we have a tight agenda. It looks like we have a number of participants, so I'm going to go ahead and call to order. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us again this week. If you're new to these meetings, again, thank you for giving us an opportunity to share some resources with you. My name is Susan Moore. I am the co-chair for the NORA Public Safety Sector Council. And so I just want to welcome you all today. I want to thank our speakers for coming today. If you haven't, please open up the agenda. You're going to see the list of the speakers, their timeframes, and also a bunch of resources and links at the end of the agenda that you can reference in the future. I want to jump right into it and be respectful of everyone's time. So I'd like to turn it over now to Becky Stoll and Bree Banks.
Good morning. So I welcome you into our topic area this morning from just outside of Nashville, Tennessee, where I live. I work for a company called Centerstone. We're a behavioral health provider providing services in numerous states in the Midwest and here in the Southeast. And I'm our Vice President for Crisis and Disaster Management. So have been working remotely for, gosh, I guess going on 8 weeks now. It's funny that the length of time you stay home is almost like when you have a baby and you refer to them in months and weeks, but I guess 8 weeks is really 2 months. So we'll switch to the months next week. I've overseen the operations for the behavioral health response to a lot of disasters over the course of my career, locally here, excuse me, nationally, and have gotten to do some international work around this. And I'm always trying to make sure that mental health and wellness are something we talk about for not only the general public, but responders. So I was tickled when I was going to get the opportunity to speak to you all today about this stuff. So if you can advance to the next slide, please. Thank you. One of the things that I have been reminding folks, and I actually just copied this slide over for another presentation I'm going to do next week, but I think being mindful that all of the folks working in this space you all are in came into this event probably with some stress that they already had going on in their lives. Not everybody, but a lot of folks already had things going on that maybe set them up to enter this event and not the optimal space that they really needed to be in. And you see a lot of those here. Some of those have to do with their job and what their role was and how things are going for them in their workspace. Another area would be interpersonal relationships, how things were going with their families and friends and spouses and ex-spouses and children and things like that. And then really just the individual themselves, how were they doing and what status were they on before they came in terms of where they were with their own physical and mental health, and were they drinking too much already, or were they using substances that maybe were not helpful to them. So I just hope you guys can, as you approach and look at people that you know in your service that may be having a hard time, I think this is where you start and kind of the genesis of understanding that people came into this event, some of them already having things going on in their life. You can go to the next slide. You also, on the extreme end, probably had some folks who were in some level of a burnout phase. And, I won't read, you guys can read and you're going to get the slide. But not only taking into account how they might have been doing in terms of stress in their own life, but really, did you have anyone who you have operational now that might have already been in a phase of really struggling with their job performance, and were they really in any of these buckets? So if you have someone in your service that you're worried about or thinking about, I encourage you to look at this in these first two slides and see what kind of life events they may have already had going on, and do they fall in any of these phases where they really were struggling prior to the event, and maybe this event has bolstered them up, and just being operational is buoying them in the waters. But what's going to happen as the operations at some point wind down and it's not as stressful? These are some of the folks that I really worry about, that may be already having some of this stuff prior to the event. You can go to the next slide. You all know this. What we worry about is what's under the water. Every time I see a slide like this or I look at a graphic like this, I think about the Titanic, and we'll try to be mindful of that. It's easy when you can see a cut or a sprain, or some kind of an injury that requires, stitches and casts and things like that. But people often suffer in silence, and it's all of that large, massive block of ice under the water that we really worry about with the population you all are in, and the stigma. I think this graphic in this slide speaks to people's hesitancy to be seen as anything but strong, and it can roll off on my back and I'm not really impacted by this. Whereas we know, given what we're seeing in the state of affairs, we would expect to see what's under that water, and really looking at people as whole people, and not just from a physical aspect, and looking at them and making sure their psychological and mental health hygiene is also really good. And go to the next slide. So, hopefully people have been doing some stress resiliency and building that kind of emotional fitness prior to the event. But if not, now's the time to start. I'm sure you guys have seen lots of stress management information, but what we're really trying to do in that space is building resilience and people's emotional fitness. You can go to the next slide. I wish it was this easy, where you could just kind of say, it's fine, just relax, don't worry about it, let it kind of roll off of your back. But it's not. It's much more complicated than that. And I think what people are being exposed to is so far beyond the daily grind. And that's why I think, the more we can do now, the better, to get people ready for an operation start to slow down and people have a time to catch their breath, that they're in a place that is much more resilient and hopefully healthy. You can go to the next slide. So we kind of, look at putting this all in some buckets, and, really being mindful to this stuff. It's difficult on a good day, but when you're going through an event like this, which is so unprecedented, because I can tell you on the end we're on the behavioral health side, and you all know this too, it's really odd on such a large scale for the people who are responding to the event in a professional capacity also are living through the event. And we just haven't seen that. Even with large disasters, not everyone on the helping side has gone through the same thing. I know we had unprecedented flooding here in 2010, and it was a large scale event, went on for quite some time, but not everyone was impacted. And so to see this where it doesn't matter which side of the ball you're on, you're in a helping profession or you're not, having all of us experience this, and then a large group of us having to also work and respond to it is really odd. So we look at people having to be mindful of this. And it's easy to run through this stuff and say, you should do this, and you should do this, and you should do this. But it takes being purposeful and mindful and really making this happen. And people have to first take responsibility for it. And you see that in the first bucket. I have to own my stress management and mental health wellness and my mental hygiene. That's up to me to do that. People can give me tools. You all can provide information for your folks. But the person has to take responsibility that they're going to do this, and they're going to make sure that they take ownership of that. And some of that leads into the reflection. Nobody knows themselves better than themselves. So I know what induces stress in me. I know what to be on the lookout for if I start feeling stressed out. And I know what things have worked for me and what things maybe have been not so great. And those haven't really worked for me. So taking that time, again, being purposeful after I've taken responsibility to really reflect upon myself, and knowing what I need is really quite important. Next slide. And then once I'm cognizant of that, it's on me to figure out the things to do for that. So taking time to relax, and just doing things that are helpful for me. Nobody can prescribe that for anyone. I know the things I enjoy doing or the things I would just much rather not do. I may be the only person that hasn't watched Tiger King, but that didn't appeal to me. I've heard a lot about it. But I surely have played Madden football on my iPad over the past, weeks, and won a Super Bowl. So, who would think that that's something I enjoyed, but I do, and I've taken the time to do that. I also think with it being so incredibly busy, especially within the population you all are in, sometimes people do need to give themselves permission just to do nothing. And whether that's vegging out and watching something, on Netflix, or really just unplugging, people have to be okay and give themselves the opportunity to do that. The relationship, I cannot stress enough the importance of relationships in especially a time like this. We heard so much stuff in the early days about social distancing, and really that kind of framing came around to it's not really social distancing, it's physical distancing. So how can we, in this virtual world that we have, maintain those relationships and make sure we're kind of circling the wagons at this time so that we do feel like we have support and people we can talk to and bounce things off of, or just kind of gripe about how much this stinks and it's not fun. And I was purposeful in the first 28 days of this. I put on my calendar every day to look at the letter A I started with A and I put that on my schedule. And I reached out to people in my contacts who had the last name of A that I just either A, wanted to talk to, or B, I had not talked to in a long time. And I did that all the way through the alphabet. I got through it last week. And I may cycle back around to A. But that was it gave me some purpose to focus on outside of work every day. And it also really connected me with some people that I'm glad I talked to or that I had reconnected with and had not spoken to in quite some time. And it was really, cool to catch up with them and see how they're doing. And, hey, we'll have lunch when this is all over, or the next time I'm in your city or in your country. So things like that, I encourage people to figure out ways. The worst thing we can do in a situation like this is be isolative. You can go to the next slide. And then the fun stuff, and these seem simplistic, but really people need to refuel. And that, includes dieting, not dieting, but diet and rest and hydration and things like that. It's easy to not do that during times where your folks are so busy, have so much going on, and so stressed out. It's easy to eat the bad stuff and to drink the bad stuff and do things that aren't as healthy for us physically. But I think the more we can be mindful of that and give ourselves some grace when we do polish off a sleeve of Oreos and a Mountain Dew, that maybe, we don't do that again tomorrow. So I think being mindful of it, but then also giving ourselves some grace is a good thing. And then you see recreation, and that one's pretty simple. It's Thursday. I'm thinking now, like, what's something I could do this weekend, whether that's hiking or going to a driving range where you can be 6 feet apart. Is there anything you can do to get out and feel some sense of normalcy and have some time that's recreational at the same time. You go to the next slide. So I won't spend long on this one, but these are, healthy living tips. I think you guys would all agree you've seen this type of stuff before. What I would encourage is it takes a lot of effort to think about this stuff and do it. And so making sure that people are doing these things and doing them regularly, I think will help people come out of this on the other side in a much better place than if they're just turning and burning all day, every day for weeks and months on end, and they're not being mindful of this stuff. These are things we can do in the event now, whether you were doing them before or you just are taking them up. We can do this stuff to make sure that we come out the other side, hopefully in a much more physical and psychological better place. Now, granted, if you've smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day for the last 10 years, maybe now is not the time to take that away. So I think people need, to be smart around things about that, but just being mindful to this. You can go to the next slide. Another thing I think is real important for the environment you all are in is this managing of the work and home relationship. Being on that front line and going out and doing this type of work can have, effects on people's family lives. And so these are the ones that, I've seen be problematic or issues before. Really that communication. So you come home from work and really how much are you telling about what was seen out here in terms of what the COVID is doing to society and doing to people. It's sad. There's a lot of stories that aren't uplifting and nice to talk about. So much like in the regular work time, around car accidents and injury and things like that. Hopefully families had already previously figured out the way that they talk about work and what's shared and what's not shared. But I think now is a heightened time to make sure that communication at home does not become an issue, so families don't see problems with that. I think family routines can get disrupted, especially now with lots of children doing their schooling at home. And then you have, somebody working probably extra hours and then coming home and being out. And I think routines can get disrupted. That kind of humor, a lot of dark and black humor happen on the job and sometime in the home environment can be challenging and maybe doesn't transfer over that well. And really just being able to go home and turn it off and not be preoccupied with someone's job and being able to step in and be a mom or be a dad or be a brother or be a sister and really function as part of the family that they're living in and be able to, at least for the off hours, be able to turn that off and as much as you can close the lid on the work environment. You can go to the next slide. Support systems, as I mentioned earlier, I think are enormous in this space. We know connectedness on the mental health side is one of the best things that people can do for their mental wellness. And, there's all kinds of ways to do that. We know in the suicide prevention space that one's capacity to feel connected and their reality of feeling connected is just enormous and helps with people not feeling so alone and isolated. So maybe take stock of yourself and if you're a supervisor, the folks that are under your leadership and really gauge what their level of connectedness is. It's frightening when you look and see someone whose support system is slim and they don't have a lot of people. So they go home and, probably feel very alone, no one to talk about. And that just really sets a stage for maybe some coping going on that's not healthy. Go to the next slide. Dr. Bree, are you on?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, so Dr. Banks, good morning, Bree, is going to talk a little bit about moral injury to round us out and wrap us up. I'll turn it over to you, Bree.
Thanks, Becky, and thank you all for having us here this morning. I do want to be sensitive to time. I know that y'all, this is a relatively brief meeting, so I'm just going to make a quick note about moral injury and part of the rationale and the logic for why we've included it here today. So over the past several weeks, as Becky said, a lot of my role during this kind of transition within COVID to telehealth has been really connecting one-on-one and in small groups with our clinicians across our enterprise. And after hearing some of the stories and some of the experiences that our clinicians are having, it led me to dig into the literature a little bit, and it led me to this construct that I found that has been primarily investigated within veterans and military service members, and it's this construct of moral injury. And then I dug a little bit more, you know how we researchers do, we kind of go into these black holes of nerd stuff, and found that this is a construct that's starting to be investigated a little bit, or at least talked about in our frontline medical staff, our first responders, our emergency room doctors. And really what this construct is, it's a psychological phenomenon that happens whenever a person either perpetrates, fails to prevent, bears witness to, or hears about some kind of act or a series of acts that go against a person's core personal morally held beliefs or moral code. And so those acts are usually either witnessed or perpetrated in the line of duty. And so when we think about for EMS and for our medical members, not being able to save one person because you had to prioritize saving someone else, things along those lines. And so these are things that lead to pretty deeply held senses of shame and regret, and they can lead to some pretty severe and long-lasting kind of psychological damage. And it's unique from vicarious trauma in that vicarious trauma usually tends to be like one core traumatic event, whereas moral injury occurs. It's more like a slow burn. It's kind of the repeated exposure to things that might go against the ways that we were trained, or ways that we, especially those in the helping professions, we tend to be pretty mission driven in our work. And so whenever we're having to do work or tasks, or prevented from being able to do things just due to being too busy, or being just the healthcare system being overburdened, not being able to enact our duty or to live our mission in our work the way that we might have wanted to. So this is just a thing that I wanted to bring up to you guys to be mindful of in your teams and in your colleagues. Those of us that are in any way touching the healthcare system are, I wouldn't say at risk of moral injury, but it is a thing that can happen for us. However, good news, it is an entirely treatable construct, and it really, the treatments are usually kind of narrative based, and they're rooted in meaning making, really exploring how and why we did a thing in a moment, or how and why we didn't do a thing in a moment, and finding meaning and purpose in that, and creating some self-compassion for ourselves, and many of the things that Becky already mentioned. But some of the things to really listen for are these folks might feel a need or a belief that they should suffer because they didn't prevent, or they did potentially, quote unquote, do in their mind what is harm. And one of the things that we know that is antithetical to healing, that's antithetical to process and to progress. And so forgiveness and self-compassion really are the antidotes for this kind of construct. But I will, I'll reach out to the organizers of this call to send out some additional resources on moral injury. There are a couple of short books that really summarize this in much more detail than I can today. But I will close there because I want to be sensitive to time. But thank you guys very much for the opportunity to sit down with y'all this morning and to share with you. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Becky and Bree. I'll move quickly because we are behind time, and I want to give Mandy an opportunity to present. I'm just going to jump right into it, Mandy, if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. My name is Mandy Tinke. I am the manager of operations for the Allegheny County Medical Examiner's Office and Forensic Labs in Pittsburgh, PA. So I'm very grateful and honored to be here with you today. We'll jump right in. First, I want to just give you a little background on our structure so that it'll help understand why vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue is a huge issue for our office and for our team members. We have laboratory operations and morgue operations. So under that umbrella, under our medical examiner, Dr. Carl Williams, we have scientists working on the bench. We have scientists in the field doing crime scene processing. We have medical legal death investigators, autopsy and histology technicians, as well as forensic pathologists, and a host of other positions as well that have a variety of job functions, all being conducted and all have a potential point for being exposed to some form of a traumatic event. So that being said, you can go ahead and move to the next slide. Some examples of where we would see some of those things are if you are a scientist on the bench, you may need to be reading case reports, you may be reviewing death reports or investigative reports for proper evidence analysis techniques. Any of that means that you are now reliving through what you're reading the traumatic event that happened to an individual. It also could be physical scene responses for processing evidence, where you're seeing those events as you're looking for forensic evidence to collect for the lab. Morgue operations is extremely intense in that we are doing continual interviews with individuals, either on the phone or in the actual field, where we are talking with families and trying to help and assist families as well as gather information on a daily basis. The medical examiner's office, we don't handle normal death. We handle sudden, traumatic, unexpected events. So we are helping these people on the worst day of their life. They never expected to wake up to what they had to face on that day. So we are getting them with a very heightened state of various emotions. The physical scene exposure as well for individuals working in this field is intense because you have all of your senses firing at that point, and any of those things may end up triggering for you a little bit later down the road. The other thing to think about as far as compassion fatigue is that when you think of maybe a homicide detective that's dealing with a homicide case, death investigators are in the position where they may be dealing with a traumatic death 4 times a day, 4 different families a day. That's just in one shift. So this is something that could potentially be voluminous for that type of an investigator. And you're also dealing with it over time. You have initial interviews that are going to be causing some type of reliving of the events, but then there are also going to be follow-up questions necessary, as well as resolution. So we may be talking to families a month or 2 after their loved one has passed because we're still waiting for test results, or they have questions about final cause of death, things like that. So it is definitely a roller coaster of grief, sadness, anger at different stages of that game. You can go ahead and move on to the next slide. So on October 27th of 2018, the Squirrel Hill area of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania experienced an unimaginable tragic event at the Tree of Life Synagogue, where a shooter had entered that synagogue, and the events that ensued resulted in 11 deaths, several injuries, and a community that would forever be changed. So in the next slide, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how our office responded.
Hold on a second. I want to ask, can other people hear me? We've lost Mandy's audio. Can I ask for anyone to confirm?
I can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Mandy. I'm sorry. When you went to the response, the start of this slide is when we lost you.
Okay, thank you. So back to the team response. We had a multifaceted approach to that. We had several team members that were there, including crime scene scientists for evidence collection. The jurisdiction falls to the medical examiner, so that was medical legal death investigators performing death investigations on scene, and we also performed all of the autopsy examinations. So this was multifaceted and a multi-day event for our office. So about 3 days worth of time, our team was assembled handling things for this incident. In addition, from the word go, we had team members placed at the Family Assistance center. So that way we were assisting and helping those families as much as possible at the very beginning. There's a lot of stressors in that type of a response. There's preparation over a couple of days of time for not knowing when you're going to need to mobilize. That's stressful. Assembling teams so that way you can make response in addition to having operational needs met was also a stressful situation for everybody on our team. Because of that, you know, through the days that we had been processing, through the nights that we had been processing, it was necessary to continually check in on everybody that was working, both back at the office for operational needs as well as at the actual event site, because all of those things coming at you at one time was definitely something that heightened everybody's senses and added to their stress. I can speak personally to the importance of the relationships that were just discussed earlier. At one point in time, I had about a dozen plates, it felt like spinning all at one time, and my stress level was definitely elevating. Somebody tossed one more plate onto my pile, and a very good friend of mine who knows me and knows my responses saw that stress level increasing. So they were able to say, okay, wait a minute. I know you, step back, take a breath. And those things are very, very important whenever you're handling types of situations like this. So those constant check-ins were very important. And even after the event and for much longer in time after the event, all those check-ins were still necessary to happen because it takes a lot of time for different people to process different things. And I was seeing things months later with some of my team. I had gone to the death scene with them, and I was on the team that went and spent the night. So over months and almost a year later, you were still checking in with them because they might still be having some issues going on. The other thing is silence is very common in death investigation because this isn't something you can just sit at the dinner table and talk about. So a lot of people will not talk about it, not express if they're having an issue. But being that we are a team and being that we all understand in this field, it definitely has a common bond that brings us together to be able to kind of process those types of things a little bit better. I'm going to go ahead and proceed. So in the normal operation, what we will do is if we have a tragic incident that some people might need to talk about, we'll call in our Pittsburgh CIS team. And the CISM team will come in and send a couple of individuals and just be available in case anybody on the team here in any variety of job functions needs to talk. That's exactly what we did. Took it a little bit further, though, after experiencing the Tree of Life event. And I had spoken with one of the mental health professionals that I work with on a regular basis through that team and asked her if she would help me to build a peer team for our office specifically. That way we had more of a localized approach and people were kind of watching each other a lot more and seeing something before we had to move to a higher level of CISM. So with that, I immediately was adopted into the Pittsburgh Department of Public Safety's peer team support group leads. So that's the heads of police, fire, and EMS, who all of those individuals have been phenomenal in adding assistance to growing our team here and helping us with that event as well. In addition to that, the Pennsylvania State Coroners Association, there are 3 of us in this office that are on the mass disaster response team as well. So being able to have our training events and talk things out regarding what we have to do for a living and regarding things that we've seen definitely was seen to be a great benefit to have those common bonds and having those people to reach out to. Go ahead to the next one. So with that peer support team, I'm going to talk about this just a little bit, and then we are going to go into the COVID-19 concerns. We created this team and we were able to write a lot of grant funding to be able to help support this team. So we have been able to pull in training events to get people specific critical incident stress management trainings, looking at more resilient leadership for our leadership teams and some more trainings on response and at least awareness of vicarious trauma. We've also been able to extend in those grants out to our 911 dispatch unit. So that way we've had several dispatchers who have also been able to participate in these trainings, which has been a great valuable thing for them too. We've also established quarterly events for the office through the peer team. Those have included things like, a breakfast, a therapy dog session coming in, happy hours, and we also push out quarterly newsletters. So that way we'll have just different fun event links around the city, mindfulness techniques, book suggestions, and just that constant reminder of, hey, the peer team is here. If you need anything, just let one of us know. Completely confidential, just reach out. So we're always trying to check on each other. Now, moving to the next slide, talking about COVID-19, this is definitely something where I'm grateful that we have our peer team established now for the past year coming into this situation. It's been vital just in this situation as well to check on every staff member all the way through management, leadership, scientist, every individual, because this whole new normal that the world's had to develop has definitely also developed a large amount of new stressors. So our office has still been functioning 24/7. We have not closed our doors and we're still producing every single day. That being said, that nature of being an essential worker definitely has some stress to come with it. You add that to now I also have to be a teacher or I have to be a child caregiver 24/7 because those facilities might be closed. That's a lot of stress in itself. But then you also have individuals that may be coming into the office here 5 days a week. That was what they got out more than anything else. So now you have separation and isolation issues that we're worried about them. Just checking in and saying, hey, are you doing okay? You know, let's have a meeting. We'll have a 15-minute discussion, just something to see how people are doing with this whole new state of affairs that we're dealing with. We also have the essential workers, the stress of scene responses and examinations. Being death investigators here, we have to go out to the scenes, we have to take the death calls. So now that everyone is at a heightened level of awareness for potential infection and for safety, those individuals are definitely thinking about that at a higher level. They're definitely considering that not only with handling the decedent, but with family interviews, public interviews, interviews with law enforcement or medical professionals. Now they are still coming in contact with individuals in the public and they have to be more aware of that interaction that normally talking to a family member they wouldn't think too much about. In addition to that, they also are going to have that in the back of their mind, I have to go home to my family. My elderly mother lives with me, my small child lives with me, you know, that fear of bringing something home to them. So individuals in this area definitely need to be checked in on. We also have gone through our peer team pushing out additional resources. There's a lot of webinars out there available for COVID-19 and mental health. Forensic Science Training Center of Excellence has pushed out a mental health resource for professional forensic individuals. So that way it's talking more about what we're dealing with and how to cope with that. And then also we've now moved our quarterly newsletters up into weekly newsletters. So the next slide will just show you a couple of pictures of some of those. We're pushing those out every single Friday so that they have some stress reduction tips, book suggestions, recipes, webinar links. There's also some links on there for things that maybe you can do in the area around Pittsburgh that you can be doing remotely and do online. And in addition, the whole therapeutic nature of giving back to other people is usually something that can help a lot of people. So we put some links on a couple of them of what you can be doing to help other individuals that are dealing with this. So my last slide is just my contact information so that you guys will have that as well. Definitely this is something that's new to our office. Our peer team's only been moving forward for about 1.5 to 2 years now, and we're still in its infancy trying to get everybody trained. But the support of our administration, the support of the fellow peer teams that we work with has been phenomenal. So I'm honored that you guys had me come in to discuss how we're doing here.
Great. Thank you so much, Mandy. I know we're a little bit over time. We have time for a couple of questions, though, if people want to use the Q&A feature to type in some questions for our speakers. Our first question came in, and it was for you, Becky. Let's see. The question was, for folks who have a value system that focuses around the importance of service to others, how can they justify to them, oops, sorry, moved on me. How can they justify to themselves that taking time out for themselves is both appropriate and warranted and not seen as being selfish?
I think they have to view I mean, this is probably not the best analogy, but if you don't change the oil in a car and put gas in it and rotate the tires and get the tune-ups it needs to, you're not going to drive that car for a really extended period of time. So, and I think the service that we're providing to folks, if we don't take the time to be in tip-top shape ourselves, we may think we're providing a great service to others, but I would question really whether we are. We may not be on our A game. So hopefully people don't see that as selfish. Just like the medical examiner's office, I mean, that sounded all amazing. That's exactly what they should be doing. So I would say that if you're not taking the time to be on top of your game and take care of yourself, and maybe that means you serve 15 people instead of serving 20 people, at least maybe you're serving those 15 people well, and not serving 20 and 5 of them, you didn't serve all that well, and it was to the detriment of your own health.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Mandy, this next question is for you. If someone had to stand up a peer support group, what steps would you recommend and prioritize?
I think for standing up a peer team, one of the first things that you should do is reach out for resources. I had the mental health professionals that we work with, as well as the heads of other peer teams. This is not reinventing the wheel. So find out other people who've already done it, because those resources have been invaluable to me and the guidance that those individuals have given. So that's definitely something that was valuable for us to stand ours up. So that would be priority number one.
Great. And then the last question also for you, how much person time does it take to generate the weekly newsletters? They looked really great and informative.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Actually, so our peer team, I had a lot of individuals who wanted to participate on the team. So we have about a dozen people, if not more, that are on the team. They've been doing it, on their own time. So the peer team is something everybody chips in for. I've done a couple of those newsletters in the past, the quarterly newsletters. We've all chipped in ideas, and they could maybe take a half an hour. Doesn't take a whole lot of time at all. You'd be surprised.
Great. I'll just let people know that we will be sending out a follow-up email that will have links out to some of the resources, as well as the slides and the recording that we'll be hosting on the Center for Health Work and Environment's webpage. Susan, do you have any closing comments?
Thanks, Carol. No, I want to thank the speakers just for making the time and putting this together for everyone. I want to thank the participants for giving their time. We certainly hope that the information shared today was useful to all of you, and that the resources on the agenda, this meeting invitation, and this meeting recording, and also all the slides are going to be shared with you. So please feel free to share them with your colleagues to help spread these resources to those in need. Thank you again. If you have any ideas about additional topics you think could be supported through this sort of mechanism, please feel free to email. The email was sent out by Carol. Please feel free to respond to that and just let her know, and she can make us all aware of any additional support areas you think would be worth exploring for this effort. Thank you again, and stay safe.